On this episode of Grimm Realities, we're going to talk about something near and dear to my heart. Generation Y. Hi, this is Grimm. Welcome to Grimm Realities. All right, so what's Generation Y? First, let's define some terms. We have generations that you've heard of, and then the generations in between that you probably haven't. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, you can make a generation in between every generation. And I say you're wrong. You can't. You only can if there is some kind of crazy shift that causes a major change in the people born in a certain time period. Think about the Great Depression. If you had to live your childhood in the Great Depression, you probably account for a small subset, a specific minor microculture that couldn't exist before you and didn't exist after you. So think about that, right? There are events in history, there are things that change us that manifest itself as generational shifts. And we happen to have a very tight window for a generational shift that I'm going to get into in 1 second. But first, let's get started with the generations everybody knows. You've got the baby boomers. That makes up our aging population right now, basically people's parents. And then we have Generation X, which everybody remembers. They were young adults in the 90s. You think about like Chasing Amy and Clerks and Mallrats. To me, that's Generation X to a T. And then you have the millennials, which are the current coming of age generation, right? They're in their mid-20s, early 30s, I guess, at this point. And then you have the newest generation to come up, the ones hitting high school and just beginning to enter college right now, Generation Z, also known as the Zoomers. That's the dab generation, right? The floss generation. So those are your generations as defined in the popular cultural lexicon. Boomers, Xers, Millennials, Gen Z. I'm going to tell you about Generation Y. First off, why is it called Generation Y? I'm a member of Generation Y, and I remember that before the term millennials came up, they were calling us Gen Y. As we were entering sort of middle school, around that era where it's like, oh, this generation is coming, but they're not quite here yet. Being here means that you have arrived on the scene as adults, or at least young adults or very close to adults. That's when generations really, truly manifest. They're incubated and created as children, but then they manifest and then begin their journey in terms of how they are going to affect the world as they move into adulthood, young adulthood. As we were first starting to move into adulthood, we were being called Generation Y. And then somebody, because everybody was super hyped about the new millennium, trust me, the year 2000 was a big deal, started calling us millennials, us. Now, I don't identify as a millennial, and I'm going to explain why in 1 second. But that's why the term Generation Y exists, because it came after X, X, Y, Z, right? And then you have Gen Z, comes after Y. There's other terms for our generation. Some people call it Xennials. How do you say that? Xennials? Don't, please, come on. Do better, folks. Xennials, really? Why don't... And now I'm going to tell you the other name for Gen Y, which actually leads me into why Gen Y is an actual thing. It's the Oregon Trail generation. And no, I'm not talking about what would that be, like the 1870s or something? I'm not talking about actually hiking the Oregon Trail. I'm talking about hiking it virtually on your monochrome green background computer and not playing it semi-ironically in your elementary school's outdated computer labs. I'm talking about playing Oregon Trail when it was brand new and the hottest shit around. I'm talking about this is cutting edge graphics shooting those buffalo. Or are they bison? Doesn't matter. Cutting edge. Are you gonna fjord this river? Ford the river. Fjord? Whatever. Are you gonna cross this river with your horses and oxen? Or are you gonna try and find a ferry? Or are you gonna go around the river? I honestly don't even remember the options. I just remember dying of dysentery all the time. Oh my God. But here's the thing, when I played Oregon Trail, this is the thing that unifies us all. It's how do you know if you're part of this generation? You played Oregon Trail when it was new. okay? You were never ironic about it. And this brings me to what defines Generation Y. You ready? Are you ready for this? This is a real thing. I need you to think for 1 second. How old is the founder of Facebook? How old is Zuckerberg? I don't even know, but he's about my age. How old is the founder of Twitter? I don't know, but he's about my age. Why are people about my age founding these fundamental companies? Usually that's not how it goes, right? Usually you have to work your way up and then you get to a point where you have enough wealth and resources and connections that you can begin to create, massive, awesome companies or invest in them, whatever. But we had a shift in the technology space. And that shift was based around late Xers. I'll give you credit, late Xers. You're close to Y, but largely Generation Y. And then it stopped for millennials. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't millennial entrepreneurs. There definitely are. But we're talking about the whole masses, right? I'm talking about the masses, the large populations of people. So Generation Y, in order for us to make computers work, we had to figure it out. There was no one to ask. We had to read manuals for hardware, for software. In order for me to play Doom versus my friend, I had to figure out what type of modem to buy the modem with no money, right? Install the modem. I had to flip dip switches on my motherboard so that way the modem would work. I can't remember how I figured that out. I found it in some obscure section of this massive manual that came with my Packard Bell computer. You didn't have to deal with this, millennials. Please stop. Don't even act like you did. I built gaming PCs, whatever. You didn't build anything. Okay, you know what happened? You know what divides Gen Y from millennials? Windows 95. Plug and play. Plug and play. Do you know what plug and play was for people like us? Plug and play? Are you kidding? This is a fantasy. I used to have to go into autoexec.bat and load up MSCDEX or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but I had to load up CD drivers so that way I could get my computer to boot into DOS instead of Windows 3.11 for workgroups. From DOS, would have loaded the CD drivers so that I could load Doom or Doom 2 off of CD-ROM. We didn't even have writers for a long time. Get it to start up, have the modem able to connect, dial into my friend's phone line, hope that his dad didn't pick up the phone just to get to play him online. And we did it. You know why we did it? Because it was awesome. It was so much fun. No one had ever done this stuff before, but we had no choice. Millennials, by the time you got old enough to be doing this stuff, it all pretty much worked. Sure, maybe you had to go and check out the internet and download a new driver. Oh my goodness. You have to use the internet. Oh, wow. You could search Yahoo for how to fix your problem. Man, I sure am impressed. I'm not. You have no idea the struggles we went through. Maybe some of you do. I know some people out there, you wanted to tinker. I'm saying if you're in my generation, you had no choice. You had to tinker. And that's the difference. That's why you have people in my generation, around my age, that grew up playing Oregon Trail that ended up way earlier than they were supposed to, creating the new structure of the world, right? Creating all of these social media and all these web applications and mobile applications. It's why we created it, because this was what we were already doing. Not because we're super smart, I mean, some of us are, but because we had no choice. By the time you came around, you had a choice. And why would you make the choice to make everything super hard? You probably didn't. Because why would you? You don't have to deal with these things. No one wants to have to load Sound Blaster. I had to load Sound Blaster. I remember getting Doom to work and it had no sound. You can't play Doom without the music. Come on. Jeez, you need to hear that imp scream. In conclusion, Generation Y, because of the birth of the personal computer in this small window of time, combined with the birth as we were entering super young adulthood, basically like mature childhood, the birth of the internet. We were there during dial-up. Grimm. I know, I've got it deeply ingrained, the sound of the I've got it in my head. You know how many times I picked up the phone to hear that? I'm like, oh man, I just kicked myself off the internet. By the time you came around, high-speed Comcast, right? Cable internet was starting. You weren't going into AOL. Now maybe you were in the very, very, very start for you older millennials closer to Gen Y, but probably not. And if you did, that was for a short period of time. So we had the birth of the personal computer as we were children. Now, Gen X definitely went through that, the personal computer, but they were older. It wasn't like what they did. They had already kind of grown up. We were growing up with it. And then right as we hit early adulthood, the internet comes around and the internet grew up with us. And we basically built what we consider to be the internet, meaning web applications. We built that. That was our idea, right? That we don't, what do we need an operating system for? Give me the internet. It's better. If you weren't playing Oregon Trail, unironically, and thinking it was cutting edge and awesome, you probably weren't Gen Y. If you had plug and play, you're probably a millennial. And if you were old enough to be at work before email was a thing, you're probably Gen X. We're from the internet. Grimm Realities.